Sarah Mitchell had been working as a flight attendant for Transcontinental Airlines for 15 years. At 42, she had seen everything the aviation industry could throw at her. Turbulence that made grown men cry, medical emergencies at 30,000 feet, and passengers who tested every ounce of her patience. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for what would happen on Flight 911 on that crisp September morning in 2019. The irony of the flight number wasn't lost on anyone at the airline. Flight 911 had been a source of nervous jokes among the crew for years. Some flight attendants refused to work that route, claiming it was bad luck. Sarah wasn't superstitious, but even she felt a slight chill whenever she saw 911 printed on her duty roster. Today was different, though. Today, she had specifically requested to work this flight. Her younger brother Marcus was getting married in San Francisco, and Flight 911 was the only direct route that would get her there in time for the rehearsal dinner. The Boeing 777 was packed to capacity with 298 passengers and 12 crew members, families heading to California for vacations, business travelers with their laptops already open, and elderly couples starting their retirement adventures filled every seat. As Sarah performed her pre-flight safety checks, she noticed something unusual. Captain Reynolds, a veteran pilot with over 20 years of experience, seemed more tense than usual. He kept checking his instruments repeatedly and had an almost worried expression on his face. When she asked him about it during the safety briefing, he mentioned that air traffic control had been acting strangely during their pre-flight communications. The passengers were settling in as the massive aircraft prepared for takeoff from Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Sarah walked through the aisles, helping people stow their carry-on bags and answering the usual questions about arrival times and meal service. A young mother traveling alone with twin toddlers caught her attention. The woman looked exhausted and overwhelmed as she tried to manage two crying babies while juggling diaper bags and bottles. Sarah stopped to help, expertly calming one of the babies while showing the mother a trick she had learned over the years. The grateful smile on the young woman's face reminded Sarah why she loved her job despite all its challenges. These small moments of human connection made everything worthwhile. As they taxied toward the runway, Sarah noticed something that would later prove to be crucial. A man in seat 14C kept looking around nervously and checking his phone constantly. He was sweating despite the comfortable cabin temperature and seemed to be counting passengers. When she offered him a glass of water, he declined abruptly and avoided eye contact. Years of experience had taught her to trust her instincts about passengers, and something about this man felt wrong. The Boeing 777 roared down the runway and lifted smoothly into the morning sky. As Chicago grew smaller below them, none of the 310 people on board realized they were about to become part of a story that would make international headlines. Sarah continued her service duties, but she kept glancing back at the nervous passenger in 14C. Her instincts were screaming that something wasn't right. During the initial climb, she decided to casually walk past his seat again. This time, she noticed he had a small device in his hand that looked like a modified phone. The screen showed what appeared to be some kind of timer or countdown. Her blood ran cold as she realized what she might be looking at. Years of post-9/11 security training kicked in, and she knew she had to act quickly but carefully. Sarah made her way to the galley and grabbed the intercom phone to contact the cockpit. Her hands were shaking as she dialed the code for the flight deck. Captain Reynolds' voice came through clearly, asking about the nature of her call. In a calm, measured tone that belied her racing heart, she reported her observations about the passenger in 14C. The captain's response was immediate and professional. He thanked her for the information and told her to continue normal service while he contacted air traffic control. Sarah hung up the phone and tried to act normally, but her mind was racing. She had been trained for situations like this, but the reality of potentially being on a hijacked aircraft was terrifying. As she continued serving drinks to passengers, Sarah began to formulate a plan. She couldn't panic, couldn't alert the other passengers, and couldn't let the suspicious man know that she was watching him. But she could do what she had been trained to do: protect the people on her aircraft at all costs. The next few hours would test everything she had learned in her 15-year career and push her to limits she never knew she had. Captain Reynolds immediately contacted air traffic control after Sarah's report. What happened next sent shockwaves through the aviation security system. When he radioed Chicago Control with Flight 911's position and the potential security threat, the air traffic controller's voice changed dramatically. Within minutes, Reynolds found himself being patched through to a direct line at the Pentagon. The conversation was brief, but chilling. A stern voice identified himself as Colonel James Harrison from the Department of Defense. He informed Captain Reynolds that Flight 911 had been flagged in their system for the past 3 weeks. Intelligence agencies had been tracking communications that suggested a potential threat to aviation, and the flight number 911 combined with the date, September 15th, had triggered multiple security alerts. What made the situation even more serious was that the suspicious passenger, later identified as Ahmed Hassan, was already on several watch lists. He had been under surveillance by the FBI for suspected ties to a terrorist cell, but there hadn't been enough evidence to arrest him. The authorities had been hoping he would lead them to other members of the organization. Instead, he had apparently decided to act alone. Back in the cabin, Sarah continued her careful observation while serving the meal service. She noticed that Hassan had not eaten anything and was becoming increasingly agitated. He kept checking the device in his hand and looking toward the cockpit door. Sarah realized that whatever he was planning, it was probably going to happen soon. She quietly alerted her fellow flight attendants through their standard hand signals, indicating a code yellow situation, possible security threat. Mark Thompson, the senior flight attendant, immediately understood and began positioning himself strategically in the aisle. Jenny Wong, who was working first class, started moving toward the rear of the aircraft as planned in their security protocols. The Boeing 757 was now flying over Iowa at 37,000 feet when Hassan suddenly stood up. Sarah's heart nearly stopped as she saw him reach into his carry-on bag. Her training kicked in immediately. Instead of screaming or running, she calmly approached him with a smile, asking if he needed anything. Hassan seemed surprised by her friendly approach. He hesitated, his hand still in the bag. Sarah could see sweat beading on his forehead and his breathing was rapid and shallow. She recognized the signs of someone about to make a desperate decision. In that moment, she made a choice that would save hundreds of lives. Speaking in a calm, gentle voice, Sarah told Hassan that she noticed he seemed uncomfortable and asked if he was feeling airsick. She offered to get him some medication from the first aid kit. This simple act of human kindness seemed to confuse him. He had been prepared for confrontation, for fear, for chaos. He wasn't prepared for someone to show him genuine concern. While talking to Hassan, Sarah discreetly signaled to Mark Thompson using the emergency hand signals they had practiced countless times. Mark immediately began moving down the opposite aisle, positioning himself for a coordinated response if Hassan became violent. Jenny Wong had already alerted the cockpit through the cabin phone system. Captain Reynolds, meanwhile, was receiving real-time updates from the Pentagon. Colonel Harrison informed him that Hassan was believed to be carrying an improvised explosive device designed to breach the cockpit door. The plan, according to intercepted communications, was to take control of the aircraft and crash it into a major landmark on the West Coast. The Pentagon had already scrambled 2 F-16 fighter jets from Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. Their orders were to shadow Flight 911, and if necessary, shoot it down before it could reach any populated areas. This information was not shared with the flight crew to avoid panic. But Captain Reynolds could sense the gravity of the situation from the military's rapid response. Hassan finally pulled his hand out of the bag. But instead of a weapon, he was holding a small bottle of prescription medication. Sarah realized he had been having an anxiety attack, but that didn't mean he wasn't dangerous. The device she had seen earlier was still in his other hand, and she could now see it more clearly. It appeared to be a detonator of some kind, with a red button prominently displayed. Sarah made a decision that went against all her training. Instead of backing away and alerting security, she sat down in the empty seat next to Hassan. She began talking to him about his family, his life, his fears. She discovered that he had 2 young daughters back home and that he was terrified about their future. Slowly, she began to understand that Hassan wasn't a hardened terrorist. He was a desperate man who had been manipulated and coerced into this situation. As Sarah continued talking with Hassan, she learned that his family was being held by the terrorist organization that had recruited him. He had been told that if he didn't carry out the attack, his wife and daughters would be killed. The explosive device strapped to his chest was real, But Hassan was having second thoughts about his mission. The conversation between Sarah and Hassan continued for nearly an hour. During this time, the FBI had traced the location of Hassan's family and was preparing a rescue operation. The Pentagon was coordinating with international intelligence agencies to simultaneously arrest the terrorist cell members who had orchestrated the plot. As Sarah continued her conversation with Hassan, she began to see the man behind the terrorist label. His real name was Ahmed Hassan al-Rashid, and he had been a mathematics teacher in Syria before the war destroyed his life. His wife Amira and twin daughters Layla and Zara were everything to him. When armed men had taken them 3 months ago, Ahmed had been willing to do anything to get them back. The terrorist organization had approached him not because of his beliefs, but because of his desperation. They knew that a man with nothing left to lose could be molded into a weapon. They had given him a simple choice: carry out this mission or watch his family die. For Ahmed, there had been no choice at all. Sarah listened to his story with genuine compassion, even as she remained acutely aware of the explosive device he was carrying. She had been trained to see terrorists as faceless enemies. But sitting next to Ahmed, she saw only a broken father who had been pushed beyond his limits. Her own father had struggled with depression after losing his job, and she remembered how desperation could drive good people to make terrible decisions. During their conversation, Sarah learned crucial details about the plot. Ahmed revealed that there were supposed to be 2 other operatives on the flight, but they had been arrested at the airport. He was now alone and unsure how to proceed with the mission. The detonator in his hand was connected to enough explosives to bring down the aircraft, but Ahmed confessed that he had never wanted to hurt innocent people. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Reynolds was receiving updates every few minutes from the Pentagon. The F-16 fighter jets were now visible through the side windows, maintaining a safe distance but ready to act if necessary. Colonel Harrison informed the captain that a special operations team was simultaneously raiding the location where Ahmed's family was being held. The passengers remained unaware of the drama unfolding around them. Most were watching movies, reading books, or sleeping. The young mother with twins that Sarah had helped earlier was finally getting some rest as her babies napped. Business travelers continued working on their laptops, and the elderly couples pointed out landmarks through the windows as they flew over the Rocky Mountains. Sarah realized that she needed to keep Ahmed talking while the authorities worked to save his family. She began sharing stories about her own family, about her brother's upcoming wedding, about the passengers on the flight who were traveling to important moments in their lives. She helped Ahmed see that the people around them weren't faceless enemies. They were fathers and mothers, sons and daughters, all with their own stories and dreams. Ahmed began to cry as Sarah talked about the young mother with twins. He told her about how his own daughters used to run to him when he came home from school, how they would climb on his lap while he graded papers. He missed their laughter, their bedtime stories, their small hands in his. The thought of never seeing them again was breaking his heart, but the thought of killing innocent children was destroying his soul. As they flew over Colorado, Sarah noticed that Ahmed's grip on the detonator was becoming less firm. He was struggling with his mission, torn between saving his family and protecting the innocent people around him. Sarah knew that this internal conflict was her opportunity to save everyone on board, but she had to be careful not to push too hard and accidentally trigger his desperation. She began to paint a picture of hope for Ahmed. She told him about the resources available to help refugees, about organizations that specialized in reuniting families separated by war and terrorism. She promised him that if he surrendered peacefully, she would personally help him find legal assistance to bring his family to safety through proper channels. Ahmed looked at her with tears in his eyes and asked a question that broke Sarah's heart. "How can you be kind to someone like me? I was going to kill you and everyone else on this plane." Sarah's response was simple but powerful. She told him that she saw a father trying to save his children, and that she understood that desperate people sometimes consider terrible options. At that moment, Captain Reynolds' voice came over the intercom with an announcement that would change everything. He informed the passengers that due to mechanical issues, they would be making an unscheduled landing in Denver for safety inspections. This was actually a coordinated plan with law enforcement to get the aircraft on the ground where specialized bomb disposal teams would be waiting. Ahmed immediately became suspicious of the announcement. He knew that the flight was supposed to go directly to San Francisco, and any deviation from the plan would trigger the terrorist organization's backup protocols. He began to panic, thinking that his handlers would assume he had been compromised and would kill his family immediately. Sarah had to think quickly. She told Ahmed that she had noticed him seeming unwell earlier and had quietly asked the captain to consider landing so he could receive medical attention. She made him believe that the landing was her idea, not a security response. This explanation seemed to calm him slightly, but he was still agitated about the change in plans. As the Boeing 777 began its descent toward Denver International Airport, Sarah could see the emergency vehicles gathering on the ground below. Fire trucks, ambulances, and what appeared to be military vehicles were positioning themselves around a remote runway. She knew that the next few minutes would determine whether everyone on board lived or died. As Flight 911 descended toward Denver International Airport, Sarah received the news that would change everything. Captain Reynolds discreetly informed the crew through their emergency communication system that the Special Operations Team had successfully located and rescued Ahmed's family. His wife Amira and daughters Layla and Zara were safe and in protective custody. Sarah knew this information could either save everyone on board or trigger a violent response from Ahmed. She had to find the right way to tell him without causing him to panic. As the aircraft continued its approach, she gently took Ahmed's free hand and told him she had some important news to share. With tears in her eyes, Sarah informed Ahmed that his family had been found and rescued by authorities. She explained that while he had been on the flight, law enforcement agencies had been working to locate his wife and daughters. They were now safe and asking for him. Ahmed's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He collapsed into Sarah's arms, sobbing with relief and disbelief. For several minutes, Ahmed couldn't speak. The weight of months of fear and desperation lifted from his shoulders, replaced by an overwhelming sense of gratitude and confusion. He looked at the detonator in his hand as if seeing it for the first time, realizing how close he had come to making an irreversible mistake that would have destroyed not only the lives of 300 innocent people, but his own chance of reuniting with his family. Sarah carefully explained to Ahmed that he needed to cooperate with authorities when they landed. She promised him that she would stay with him and help him through the process. She also assured him that his decision to choose peace over violence would be taken into consideration by the legal system. Ahmed nodded slowly, finally understanding that he had a chance at a real future with his family. As the Boeing 777 touched down on the runway at Denver International Airport, Ahmed handed the detonator to Sarah. His hands were shaking as he carefully removed the explosive vest he had been wearing under his jacket. Sarah immediately signaled to Mark Thompson, who contacted the cockpit to inform them that the threat had been neutralized. The aircraft was directed to a remote area of the airport, where bomb disposal experts and FBI agents were waiting. Captain Reynolds announced to the passengers that there would be a brief delay due to security procedures, asking everyone to remain calm and in their seats. Most passengers assumed it was a routine security check, unaware of how close they had come to disaster. When the aircraft doors opened, Ahmed was the first to exit, accompanied by Sarah and 2 FBI agents. The bomb disposal team immediately took possession of the explosive device and detonator, confirming that they were indeed capable of destroying the aircraft. Ahmed was taken into custody, but Sarah insisted on accompanying him to ensure he was treated fairly. At the FBI field office in Denver, Ahmed provided detailed information about the terrorist organization that had recruited him. His cooperation led to the arrest of 12 other operatives across 3 countries and prevented several other planned attacks. The information he provided was invaluable to international counterterrorism efforts. Sarah's actions on Flight 911 had saved not only the 300 people on board, but potentially thousands of others who might have been victims of future attacks. Her ability to see the humanity in Ahmed, even in the most terrifying circumstances, had turned a potential terrorist into a valuable asset in the fight against terrorism. The passengers of Flight 911 were eventually transferred to another aircraft and continued their journey to San Francisco, most of them never knowing how close they had come to death. The young mother with twins sent Sarah a thank you card weeks later, not for saving her life, but for helping her with her babies at the beginning of the flight. She had no idea about the greater service Sarah had performed. The media coverage of the incident was intense but carefully managed by authorities. Sarah became known as the Angel of Flight 911, though she always insisted that Ahmed was the real hero for choosing to do the right thing when it mattered most. She used her newfound fame to advocate for better support systems for refugees and victims of terrorism. Ahmed's legal case became a landmark in terrorism prosecution. His cooperation with authorities and his decision to abandon the attack when given the choice resulted in a reduced sentence. He was eventually able to enter the witness protection program with his family, starting a new life in a small American town where he returned to teaching mathematics. The terrorist organization that had recruited Ahmed was completely dismantled within 6 months. The intelligence he provided led to the discovery of training camps, weapons caches, and communication networks that had been operating for years. Law enforcement agencies around the world praised the operation as one of the most successful counterterrorism efforts in recent history. For Sarah, the most rewarding moment came 3 years later when she received a letter from Ahmed's daughter Layla, who was now learning English in school. The letter, written in careful childish handwriting, simply said, "Thank you for bringing my daddy home." Sarah framed the letter and kept it on her desk as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, compassion and understanding could triumph over fear and hatred. 6 months after the Flight 911 incident, Sarah Mitchell found herself in Washington, D.C., sitting across from congressional leaders and terrorism experts. The House Committee on Homeland Security had invited her to testify about her experience and provide recommendations for improving aviation security protocols. Her testimony would influence policy changes that would affect millions of travelers worldwide. Sarah had initially been reluctant to accept the invitation. She preferred to stay out of the spotlight and return to her normal life as a flight attendant. However, she realized that her unique experience could help prevent similar situations in the future. She had learned things about human behavior under extreme stress that could be valuable to security professionals and mental health experts. During her testimony, Sarah emphasized the importance of understanding the human element in terrorism prevention. She explained how Ahmed's story revealed that not all terrorists are ideologically motivated fanatics. Many are ordinary people pushed to desperate measures by extraordinary circumstances. This insight led to new training, programs for airline personnel that focused on identifying and responding to different types of security threats. The Pentagon had been particularly interested in Sarah's psychological approach to the crisis. Colonel Harrison, who had coordinated the military response to Flight 911, became a strong advocate for incorporating conflict resolution and crisis counseling techniques into standard security training. He argued that Sarah's success in de-escalating the situation proved that violence wasn't always the only option when dealing with potential terrorists. Sarah's recommendations led to the creation of the Aviation Crisis Intervention Program, a specialized training course for flight attendants and pilots. The program taught aviation personnel how to recognize signs of emotional distress in passengers and how to use communication techniques to de-escalate potentially dangerous situations. Sarah became the program's chief instructor, training thousands of airline employees over the following years. The impact of Sarah's approach extended beyond aviation security. Law enforcement agencies began incorporating her techniques into their training programs for dealing with hostage situations and suicide interventions. Mental health professionals studied her interaction with Ahmed to better understand how empathy and active listening could influence people in crisis situations. Ahmed's testimony from prison also played a crucial role in reshaping counterterrorism strategies. His detailed account of how he was recruited and manipulated by the terrorist organization revealed new patterns that intelligence agencies hadn't previously recognized. He described how the terrorists specifically targeted refugees and immigrants who were separated from their families, exploiting their vulnerability and desperation. This information led to the development of new support programs for displaced persons and refugees. Immigration services began providing enhanced counseling and family reunification assistance to prevent vulnerable individuals from being recruited by terrorist organizations. Ahmed's case became a textbook example of how addressing root causes of desperation could be more effective than purely punitive approaches to terrorism prevention. The terrorist organization that had recruited Ahmed, known as the New Dawn Network, had been operating across multiple continents for over 5 years before Flight 911. The intelligence provided by Ahmed revealed that the group had been responsible for at least 15 successful attacks and dozens of failed attempts. The network's complete dismantling prevented an estimated 30 additional planned attacks. International cooperation in the investigation became a model for future counterterrorism efforts. Agencies from 12 different countries shared intelligence and coordinated arrests simultaneously, preventing any members of the organization from escaping or destroying evidence. The operation, codenamed Broken Chain, became one of the most successful international law enforcement collaborations in history. Sarah's brother Marcus, whose wedding had originally motivated her to request Flight 911, postponed his ceremony to support Sarah through the aftermath of the incident. When the wedding finally took place 3 months later, Ahmed's wife Amira and daughters were among the guests. The friendship that developed between Sarah's family and Ahmed's family became a symbol of how understanding and compassion could overcome even the most difficult circumstances. The media attention surrounding Flight 911 had initially focused on the dramatic aspects of the story, the bomb, the fighter jets, the last-minute rescue. However, as more details emerged about Sarah's conversation with Ahmed, public attention shifted to the deeper questions about human nature, desperation, and the power of empathy to change hearts and minds. Sarah used her platform to speak about the refugee crisis and the importance of supporting displaced families. She established a foundation called Second Chances that provided counseling and support services for immigrants and refugees who were struggling to adapt to life in America. The foundation's work helped prevent several other individuals from being recruited by extremist organizations. Ahmed's transformation from potential terrorist to valued intelligence asset inspired changes in how the justice system dealt with terrorism cases. His cooperation agreement became a template for similar cases, offering reduced sentences and protection for individuals who provided substantial assistance in dismantling terrorist networks. This approach proved more effective than traditional punishment-only strategies. The friendship between Sarah and Ahmed's family continued to grow over the years. Sarah became an honorary aunt to Layla and Zara, who often stayed with her family during school holidays. Ahmed, working under his new identity in the Witness Protection Program, sent Sarah regular updates about his students and his efforts to rebuild his life. 5 years after Flight 911, Sarah Mitchell stood before an audience of international aviation security experts at the Global Aviation Safety Conference in London. She was delivering the keynote address about human-centered approaches to terrorism prevention. In the audience sat representatives from over 50 countries, all eager to learn from the woman who had changed how the world thought about airline security. The conference hall was packed with airline executives, government officials, and security professionals who had implemented programs based on Sarah's methodologies. The Aviation Crisis Intervention Program she had developed was now mandatory training for airline personnel in 37 countries. Statistical analysis showed that the program had successfully de-escalated over 200 potentially dangerous situations since its implementation. As Sarah spoke about the importance of seeing the person behind the threat, she noticed a familiar face in the audience. Ahmed al-Rashid, now living under the name David Roberts, had been granted special permission to attend the conference. He worked as a mathematics teacher at a small college in Vermont and had become an advocate for refugee rights and terrorism prevention programs. After her speech, Sarah and Ahmed met privately for the first time since the legal proceedings following Flight 911. Ahmed thanked Sarah again for seeing his humanity when everyone else saw only a terrorist. He told her about his daughters, who were now thriving in American schools and spoke perfect English. Layla wanted to become a doctor, while Zara dreamed of being a teacher like her father. Ahmed's wife Amira had also rebuilt her life, working as a translator for refugee assistance programs. The family had found peace in their small Vermont community, where Ahmed coached the high school math team, and Amira volunteered at the local mosque. They had become living proof that people could overcome even the darkest chapters of their lives with the right support and understanding. The ripple effects of Flight 911 continued to influence policy and practice around the world. The incident had demonstrated that traditional security approaches, while necessary, were not sufficient to address the complex human factors that drove individuals to extremism. Sarah's approach had shown that empathy and understanding could be powerful tools in preventing violence. Colonel Harrison, who had coordinated the military response to Flight 911, had retired from the Pentagon and now directed the International Center for Aviation Security. He often spoke about how Sarah's actions had taught him that the most sophisticated weapons and surveillance systems couldn't replace human intuition and compassion in preventing terrorism. The young mother with twins whom Sarah had helped at the beginning of that fateful flight had also been impacted by the story. When she learned years later about what had really happened on Flight 911, she was inspired to become a social worker specializing in helping refugee families. She often told her children, now 8 years old, about the kind flight attendant who had helped them and saved their lives without them ever knowing. Transcontinental Airlines had honored Sarah by naming their new training facility the Sarah Mitchell Center for Aviation Excellence. The airline had also established a scholarship program for refugees pursuing careers in aviation, inspired by Ahmed's story of redemption and second chances. The scholarship had helped over 100 individuals begin new careers in the aviation industry. The FBI had credited the Flight 911 investigation with fundamentally changing how they approached terrorism cases. The intelligence provided by Ahmed had led to the prevention of numerous attacks and the development of new strategies for identifying and disrupting terrorist networks. His cooperation had saved countless lives and demonstrated the value of treating potential terrorists as human beings rather than simply criminals. International law enforcement agencies had adopted the Flight 911 protocol, a set of procedures for handling aviation security threats that emphasized de-escalation and communication alongside traditional security measures. The protocol had been successfully used in 17 similar incidents, with peaceful resolutions achieved in all cases. Sarah continued to work as a flight attendant, though she now also served as a consultant for aviation security and crisis intervention programs. She had received numerous awards and honors, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom, but she remained humble about her role in preventing the tragedy. She always insisted that Ahmed was the real hero for choosing to abandon his mission and help prevent future attacks. The story of Flight 911 had become required reading at military academies, law enforcement training centers, and conflict resolution programs around the world. It demonstrated that even in the most dangerous situations, human connection and understanding could triumph over fear and hatred. The incident had shown that sometimes the most powerful weapon against terrorism was simply treating potential terrorists as human beings worthy of compassion and understanding. As Sarah boarded flights for her regular work schedule, passengers often recognized her and thanked her for her service. She always reminded them that the real lesson of Flight 911 wasn't about heroism or dramatic rescues, but about the importance of seeing the humanity in everyone, even those who seemed to be our enemies. In a world increasingly divided by fear and mistrust, Sarah's story remained a powerful reminder that empathy and understanding could still change hearts, save lives, and make the world a safer place for everyone. Ahmed continued to send Sarah holiday cards each year, signed by his entire family. The cards always included photos of his daughters growing up, achieving their dreams and living the normal American teenage lives that had once seemed impossible. For Sarah, these simple cards were worth more than all the medals and recognition she had received, because they represented the true measure of success: a family reunited, lives saved, and hope restored in the darkest of circumstances.